This is Macro Analytics, delivering frank conversations on global macroeconomics and market analysis, outside the mainstream, featuring discussions and debates between Gordon T. Long, publisher and editor of GordonTLong.com, and his guests. The content of this discussion is strictly the opinion of the participants. It is in no way a solicitation for business, nor is it to be considered investment advice of any sort. Always consult a registered investment advisor before making any investment decision. These discussions are extremely hard-hitting and terribly frank, and parental discretion is advised. Now, on to the show.
I'm Gord Long with GordonTLong.com, and I have with me this morning John Rubino, well-known author and publisher of website DollarCollapse.com and the co-author of the most recent book, The Money Bubble. Good morning, John. We will continue from session 1, already in progress. What about China, John?
China is maybe the most fascinating of all of these stories because they've been ostensibly the success story in the global financial system of the last 5 years. And it turns out that a big part of that was the same kind of smoke and mirrors that we saw in the U.S. and Japan and Europe over the last few decades. Basically, in 2008, when their major customers, the U.S. and Europe, were starting to implode, China responded to that with a domestic infrastructure building program, the likes of which the human race has never seen before. They built hundreds of skyscrapers and roads and bridges and power plants and just about every other major piece of infrastructure that you can think of. And they borrowed the money. You know, they created what is now called a shadow banking system of local and regional development agencies and wealth funds and other kinds of things that seem to be kind of off the books to finance all of this. And they took on basically $15 trillion new dollars of debt in the last 5 years. So that's vastly more than the U.S. has borrowed in that time. And China's economy is much smaller than the U.S. economy. So as a percent of their GDP, they borrowed an absolutely amazing amount of money to build all this stuff. Unfortunately, you can't build hundreds of skyscrapers, roads, bridges, and power plants and have all of them turn out to be exactly where they should be and operate exactly as they should and be generally productive assets. And so what's happening now is a lot of this stuff turned out to be malinvestment. It pumped up the economy in the short run while the construction was going on, but it's not generating a return on that investment that can hope to pay off their cost. And so China's bad loans, non-performing debt, is soaring right now. You know, you see it on the chart here, falling during the early stages of their credit binge, and then turning around and starting to rise after a lot of these things had been put into place and turned out to be non-productive. So China has something akin to the U.S. Housing bubble, only on a much bigger scale. And they've got to deal with a series of bad debts blowing up in the next week, month, year, and figure out whether to bail these things out or to let them blow up, and which to bail out and which to let blow up. And it's highly unlikely that they're going to be able to do this in a smooth fashion because these numbers are just gigantic.
You know, we had the 2008 financial crisis. We were able to react, we, the Federal Reserve and the government, in a very complex manner. Remember all the various key acronyms we came up with, different elements to fix the problem or to stop the problem from getting worse. We could react, we knew where to go, and we went at it. I think there were 10 different structures that the Federal Reserve pumped out with a matter of 60 days. Contrast that to China. They don't even know the magnitude of the shadow banking system. They're quite clear on that. They don't have the same control mechanisms. When things start to blow up, they're going to be lucky to know where it is, ever mind knowing how to react. And it's already happening, John. The whole fiasco we just had in the last 10 days with the coal mines, there was some 6 shadow banks that they had to come in and bail out. So here they are trying to get their hands around us to slow this explosion that's out of control. But the moment they squeeze on it, something else pops and they got to bail it out. And it just seems to be getting worse and worse and worse, as you point out, with the non-performing loans themselves climbing. And the shadow banking over there works much different. It's almost extortion level lending, John. People are desperate. They really pay to get the money. So they've now leveraged themselves up with excess debt levels because of the payment schemes they've had to accept to get extra cash. So it's all coming down around their ears, but they have no way of managing it. In January, the bank lending hit a 4-year high, so it's still growing.
Yeah, China's opacity is one of the things that makes it so terrifying because, as you said, the Chinese themselves don't really know where all this debt is and what it's been put towards. And certainly the analysts in the West don't know it then. And, but it's been like that for decades, really, with China. I interviewed Nouriel Roubini. It's got to be 7 or 8 years ago now. And we talked about China, and one of the things he said was that, the Chinese report their GDP number the day after it's the end of the quarter. And it takes the U.S. weeks to put together all the data in here to come up with a GDP number, and China just reports it because they knew ahead of time what it was supposed to be. They just make these numbers up and say, okay, we're going to have 7% growth, and they just allocate enough new cash to infrastructure spending to get 7% growth. That's how they do their GDP. And they just tell you at the end of the quarter what it was. And, because we can't get in there and analyze whether any of that's true or where the money's going or anything, China should have always been a really scary proposition from an investor standpoint. And now we're finding out why. Some of this is coming to light. And what we're finding out is really scary. The numbers are huge. The amount of recent investment that's going bad is big and growing, and China's ability to deal with it is really limited because they don't, as you said, they don't have really modern financial management institutions and structures in place. It's been a command and control economy mostly. And so that's not a good structure for dealing with a really multifaceted crisis. And that's what they've got in the year ahead.
And the people don't trust the government. So they believe in real estate as an investment. So they've been just driving up prices with any of the wealth they can into real estate, which is now imploding. The local governments use the land that they have as collateral through their shadow banking. And so this whole growth of the shadow bank has been these wealth management products, which the public has been using as ways of making money or storing their money. And that's short-term duration lending. And so any kind of slowdown in liquidity and this bubble bursts. And I really think the government, they're at the steering wheel and they're just afraid to take their foot off the accelerator right now. They just really don't know what to do. But you'll notice that this year China is now the biggest buyer of gold. And it's not just the Chinese government, which it clearly is, and whatever their strategy is, and you and I have done shows on what that strategy is, but the people themselves are buying it. They can't buy it fast enough.
Yeah. They get it. They're moving their paper wealth into real assets. And unfortunately, they have a really limited number of real assets. Buying gold is probably a good idea for them. But as you said, buying real estate, which is one of the typical ways you get out of financial assets, is so overdone in China that looks like it's ready to blow up.
I read the other day, I think Canada had 50 billionaires from China applying for entry into Canada, whether it was company or individuals, and Canada was having problems with that.
Yeah, and that money's going into Vancouver real estate, basically. They've got a massive bubble going on right now.
Exactly. So the only point you can get out of that is there's a lot of nervousness within China right now.
Absolutely.
We didn't paint a very good scenario on this little tour of the world here this morning, did we, John?
No, the basic story is that lots of things could blow up, and it's entirely possible that they all go in 2014. All of these are near-term stories. There's nothing really, 10 years from now this is going to happen about any of this. It's all stuff that could easily blow up in our faces in the next month. So maybe only one of them happens, and then it kind of spreads to the rest of the world, or maybe they all blow up at once, which would be, from a historian standpoint, a pretty fascinating time, but for the rest of us, not pleasant at all.
So what should our listeners do, John?
Well, you want to get as far away as possible from your local fiat currency, because the only response that the governments of the world are going to be able to have to this when these things start to blow up or when they all blow up at once is more monetary ease. They're going to open the floodgates. Every central bank in the world is going to be in aggressive easing mode a year or two from now. And that's got to affect the value of the world's major fiat currencies. It's got to make them less valuable because that's going to be the explicit policy goal of the world's central banks. They need to devalue their currencies in order to make their debts manageable. So you don't want to be holding those currencies. You want real assets other than Chinese real estate, but you want precious metals and you want to diversify geographically by moving some money outside of your country, whichever country you're in, and into someplace else on the assumption that not everything is going to blow up at once. And so if you move some money around, there's a greater likelihood that some of your capital will survive whatever happens. You know, we haven't talked about the other big policy option that the governments are going to find out that they have to try, and that's wealth confiscation. At the same time, they're going to be easing aggressively. They're going to be trying to figure out ways to get into our bank and brokerage accounts and take big chunks of that to finance themselves. So you really want to be diversified.
That's already happening.
Yeah.
It just doesn't get a lot of public press. You listen to the State of the Union. Obama talked about MIRA, which is self-directed IRAs using government bonds, and we can already do that. But this is an example of setting up the pins to take bigger roles, bigger positions of pension plans, whether it's through banks, et cetera, not necessarily in that regard, but in some of the other countries that we're already doing it. So financial repression as a macroprudential strategy is continuing to expand and grow, and they have no choice. It's the only solution available to them. John, on the point on gold and silver, I've always been a big hawk on it, but it's my personal opinion your gains are going to be taxed right to the hilt.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. See, nothing is going to be easy pretty soon, because one of the strategies that kind of flows from what we talked about might be to borrow as much money as possible and then try to buy real assets with it on the assumption that inflation will make your debts less onerous while your real assets go up in price. But we don't know for sure that governments will allow that to happen either. They might index the rate on mortgages and other kinds of loans so they go up with the inflation rate, so that you've borrowed money and the money you have to pay out gets less and less valuable, but the interest rate you have to pay goes up to offset it. So there's really no simple solution to this. You've got to be very careful, watch all of this, and then diversify. You know, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Well, the Austrian economists who really understood these kinds of issues, the way out of it and the way to protect yourself, there is no way out of it. Once you're on this road, it inevitably leads to a collapse in terms of the currency. But the strategy is what they call the indirect exchange. And that's just what you alluded to, John, is to borrow currencies that are being debased and to take that asset, well, it is currently an asset, if I can call money an asset, and to buy real hard assets, assets that have a net free discounted cash flow or are in fact wealth, and that is gold or silver, farmland, etc. And a lot of smart money has been doing that for at least the last 6 to 8 years. So you're seeing farmland now being beat up. You're going to see gold taxed when it starts to shoot up, and it will shoot up. So the strategies are getting to be more sophisticated, but that's where the smart money, that's what they're looking at right now.
Yeah. And the thing is that the smart money's doing it is not a green light for the average person to do it, though, because if you have a lot of debt and anything happens and you can't cover your debts, it doesn't matter what you invested that money in, you still lose everything because it's all taken away from you when you go bankrupt. So you are probably a lot better off going debt free, even though that means you pass up the chance to participate in the death of the dollar or whatever. But you can sleep at night that way.
Exactly. The smart money and the magnitude they're looking, example of that, the private equity companies right now that can borrow money at next to nothing through the primary dealers, take that money and they're investing in the third world countries in where forced privatization is having to occur. So you're, for example, let's have a power generation station in Indonesia. Well, you're going to turn that over and you're going to privatize it. So that money's coming in to take it over because the government needs the money. Now, what have you got? You've got useless money, currency. You've now converted it into a real asset, a power generation station. But what you have is you have guaranteed cash flow because you have the right of the government they've got to have the power. So whatever's going to have to be charged, so you will at least maintain an income from that asset, unless you're going to shut down and have no power in the country. So there's a relative amount of regulatory protection on your asset. And you just take that thought and start to see where the money's going. And I just saw Carlyle, 600% return this year. And that's what they're using. It's a combination of regulatory arbitrage and using government protections in a combination of privatization and private public partnerships. That's where the trillions are going, John. It's basically a very large scale debt for equity swap that's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just to give some of our listeners a perspective of the real games that are being played with people with real money who understand that these problems in spade. They're just not sticking gold bars down in their basements.
Mm-hmm.
Any closing comments you'd like to leave with our listeners?
No, I think we've covered everything pretty well today, Gord.
We went around the world fast enough, so I apologize if we moved too fast. John, where can our listeners learn more about your site, your writings, and your book?
I run dollarcollapse.com. So you can go there and, get an update on the things that we talked about today, and also find out where to buy the book.
John, is there another one coming out in this series? What will blow up first? Because you've had 4 out. Is there one more coming?
Yeah, there might be 1 or 2 more. It's a very target-rich environment out there right now.
So our listeners can sign up at your site to be on that newsletter when those come out?
Definitely.
Okay. Catch you again next month?
Great. Thanks, Gord.
Thank you very much. Bye.
This has been Gordon T. Long, editor and publisher of GordonTLong.com. New recordings are posted regularly and can be found at GordonTLong.com. New show notifications are available through RSS feed, iTunes, and other social networking venues at GordonTLong.com.